All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to be joined today by friend of Halitics, Jack Quirk. He blogs at socratesspeaks.blogspot.com. We put the link there. Jack, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Al?
I'm really doing well, and I try to get you on, especially when there's Catholic important news in the media. I mean, everything's important to Catholics, obviously, just like it is to everyone. But the Pope, obviously, that is also a Catholic-specific topic. We have a new Pope. Leo the 14th, I wanted you to weigh in, and you have thoughts, or, did you have thoughts right away? Or, I mean, how did that work in your mind?
Well, when he said that he was going to call himself Leo the 14th, obviously I thought about Leo the 13th, who was pretty famous Pope in connection with issues that I'm concerned with, specifically Catholic social teaching. He was the first Pope to address the situation regarding the industrial age and the problems that labor had. This is back in the end of the 19th century, and he has since that time been recognized as the founder, I guess you could say, of Catholic social teaching, which is something that developed during from the industrial age, and so it just occurred to me that he was going to continue in that vein, and it looks like that's what it is. And I was. That's not just a scuttlebutt. I think that he is, if I'm not mistaken, he has in fact indicated that that was the reason why he chose the name. So
yeah, we'll talk about that. I actually have a slide for that because he's focusing sort of on a new industrial revolution. Leo the 13th was responding to labor unrest in the industrial world in Europe in the late 19th century, I believe, around unionization, the unionization movement.
Right.
And now the new Pope is concerned about the loss of jobs and the dignity of labor in the tech industry.
Yeah, well, that's certainly one thing. Now, one thing that he's articulated quite a bit is the issue with migrants, and well, of course, Pope Francis was not happy with what our current American administration is doing with regard to that, and this is something that Pope Leo the 14th is going to emphasize. He has emphasized it in the past. Anyway, I mean, you never know what they're going to do, but that's been an issue for him for quite a while now, and so that's what he comes into it as, and the fact that he has picked Leo the 14th as his name, that indicates to us that he's going to emphasize Catholic social teaching in that way. So there we go.
It's a positive sign from my perspective, and I believe yours. We're going to get into all this in greater detail. If you've been watching Halitics for any period of time over the past about 18 months now, I do always center in my program what's happening in Gaza. So we're going to just give a brief discussion there. Now, the death count, according to WAFA, which is, I believe, I'm not sure which country WAFA is. Maybe it's Jordan. Do you know what WAFA, which country that originates, Jack? I thought I'd ask you since you're on. WAFA? No?
WAFA, no.
Say it again? You don't? No. But whichever it is, we have used them as a source before. 52,862 is the count they report today, and that does come from the Palestinian Health Ministry. So obviously, a terrible, terrible circumstances. They just continue the deaths there. We'll get into how Pope Francis was appalled by this. Recently deceased Pope, 33 Palestinians killed Sunday, and I'll get to the number over the weekend. The total count we just mentioned, 52,862. No, I didn't mention that. 52,862 fatalities since October 7th, and just a horrific situation. Cannot say it enough. Words really fail even me, and I don't know that I'm usually rendered mute or rendered without words, but it happens to me when I talk about this horrible circumstance in the Middle East, and specifically Gaza. We have 75 additional deaths Friday, Saturday, and it should say Sunday, because that count does include Sunday. So 3 days over the weekend, 75 additional deaths. And we don't leave Trump out of this at all. I used to talk about the Harris-Biden genocide. So now it's the Trump, Netanyahu, Harris-Biden genocide with 2,753 Gazans by count, well over 1,000 children. Jack, I don't want to spend too much time speaking just about this, whatever word you want to use. I know you and I have just argued a little bit about it, but the deaths, the very, very high number of children's deaths must be especially appalling for you.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's a war crime. There's no question about it. I mean, I think we could agree that it is a war crime. He's the, I got my feeling about that has been that there was when the illegitimate settlements began, we should have thought about cutting Israel off with regard to military aid. And that's been going on for a while now. And now this situation has commenced. And we really, look, I'm not saying that Israel doesn't have the right to defend itself. It certainly does. But the way that it's going about it it's horrific. And, they're basically creating they're trying to create terror. But the problem is with that is that they don't, I think in a sense they're playing into Hamas's hands, because, Hamas doesn't care about those deaths any more than Israel does. And it's just giving Hamas a propaganda tool. And then of course there's all the suffering and all the deaths and everything else. It's just terrible. They really should have moved forward some time ago with creating that Palestinian state and letting that happen.
So one of the themes of this program, just to jump in, cut you off a little bit, one of the themes is the influence that the Pope has to make life better around the world. And we've seen, certainly with Francis, and hopefully, and I think the signs are very, very good with Leo the 14th, or just Leo, if we want to call him that he, like Francis, are very, very concerned with everyday people, with the victims of empire, with the poor. Francis expressed his love for all people, the victims of war especially, by calling the Catholic Church in Gaza every night. He, according to the spokesperson of that church, didn't just love the Catholics. He wasn't only concerned with Catholics in Gaza, but with all the victims in Gaza, every Gazan, according to George Anton. And we know that this new Pope is also centering peace, but they haven't had much success, tragically, Francis, or did he? I mean, what influence do you think Francis had? What influence do you think that Leo can have, will have moving forward to make things a little safer around the world?
Either one of them can set the moral tone for how we observe this. And, they're both of them just reflecting what really anybody, not just Catholics, but anybody of goodwill is going to imagine or think about when you think about what's going on in Gaza. I mean, the civilian deaths are tragic. There's just no other way to look at it. It's terrible. And, you can just say that over and over again. And, I think when the Pope weighs in on that, and it helps provide clarity in terms of the world's view of what's going on there. And I think that has some effect. I mean, I know, I realize that the Pope doesn't have an army, and you've got, and in Gaza, while there are some Catholics there, they're mostly going to be Muslim, and of course Israel, they're mostly Jewish. But so there's not going to be as much of an effect as if it were a majority Catholic country, but still, I think the Pope, when that office is working correctly, has a moral voice and an effective moral voice with regard to things that are going on in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. There's over 1 billion Catholics, if I'm right. And do you think that the Pope, using the name to represent whoever is the head of the Catholic Church, whether it's now Leo, previously Francis, before Francis Benedict, does their bully pulpit influence extend beyond the Catholic Church, both to other Christians, as well as Protestant Orthodox Church, and to other religions as well?
Well, I mean, it can. I mean, you can answer that yourself. Does that have any effect on you?
I mean, I will say this. Let me just quickly, when the Pope says something I like it, and I spread it, and I say, hey, look what the Pope says, right? Yeah. And when he says something I don't, I ignore it. Yeah. Which I'll bet is what a lot of Catholics do too, to be perfectly honest with you.
Catholics do that, except, we have a lot of, unfortunately, in the United States, there's been a lot of Catholics who've been sucked into the Trump vortex, and that's had an unfortunate result. Of course, they're always, they'll tell you that they don't particularly care for the Pope and the things that he says. Back in the days of Benedict, there was a conservative writer who, when Benedict said it was all in the same encyclical, and this guy just, I can't remember which one it was, but he just said the part that he agreed with was authoritative, and the part that he didn't agree with wasn't, and it was in the same encyclical. So yeah, people cherry pick when it comes to popes. There's no question about that.
Do you view your role as a blogger and as a very well educated Catholic who went to law school, who's a lawyer, and who is articulate? I mean, do you view your role as including spreading the Catholic social doctrine?
Well, I actually, for a while, I made a specific effort towards that, and that was a number of years ago. I would say that turned out to not be overly successful. People just end up believing what they believe. This goes for the liberal and the conservative side, which are misnomers. But when it comes to politics, people believe what they believe, and to actually change your mind because of what the church is teaching isn't something that is particularly common, at least not in the United States these days.
Well, it's certainly not common for people to change their mind because of what Hal Ginsberg is saying either, and it is very frustrating to me, at least.
So, but I think that, so I made a specific effort in that regard some years ago, but now, and I think about some years ago, I'm as old as the Pope now, and so and time is moving faster. But I was, but no, now what I do is I try to embody it in my perception of things, and so when I write, that's in the background, that's in the back of my head, and so I try to persuade in that vein.
So, Jack, I put two very prominent, very powerful men who call themselves Catholics on the screen right now, Supreme Court justices. They're not the only Catholic Supreme Court justices. I think all the justices, unless I'm mistaken, are either Catholic or Jewish. But these two head up the most, right-wing segment of the court. And what sort of intrigues me about this, and I talked to my neighbor about this, who is like you, I would call you don't like progressive maybe, but she would call herself a progressive Catholic. Do you just get to say I'm Catholic? I mean, or you get to be like take the sacraments, and then it doesn't. You can act in ways that I think are completely contradictory to the beautiful messages that we've heard, at least from recent popes, that are in the New Testament of loving your fellow man and woman, about the importance of treating the immigrant, the stranger, with kindness and love and generosity. That money has its place, but not in the temple. How can you take the positions that these two men take and call yourselves Catholic? And how does that conflict, in your view, with what, I mean, what is it? You just get to say I'm Catholic and then you can do whatever the hell you want? I don't get that.
When you're raised Catholic and you go to Catholic church, a lot of people do that. I mean, I'm not really in a position to judge the sincerity of other Catholics in terms of their religion, but all I can say is that I try to model myself after the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of the church. And apparently, some people come up with different conclusions. It comes down to, well, what Jesus said: "Judge not, that you not be judged." All I can do is that I pray that the gospel message permeates through society and the world. Gorsuch, by the way, I believe is Episcopalian, not Catholic. But
wait, who is Episcopalian?
Gorsuch, I believe.
Oh, okay. I'll look that up. Both Alito and Thomas have prominently aligned themselves with the Catholic Church, and so I think it's fit.
Yeah, Roberts and Kavanaugh.
Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, she was notable. That was notable when she was in the confirmation situation, because that was being used against her. But she's turning out to be a little more reasonable than some of the other ones.
Well, I make that point that the Trump justices haven't necessarily been the worst. Neither Alito nor Thomas, who I think are the two worst, were selected by Trump. So it is interesting. I do want to have a quick note here from Ari, just helping us out here. WAFA is the Palestinian news agency. And I did know that. It was in the back of my head, but I certainly couldn't summon up that information. So Ari, thank you for sharing. Very much appreciate. Don't forget, click like, click subscribe. We want to get, obviously, as many people on board as possible. Go ahead, Jack. I cut you off there. Sorry.
I wasn't even in the back of my head. That's the first I've heard of it. WAFA.
No, I didn't. I just have reported WAFA before, and I know I had seen their name there. So do you think that's a reasonable question, or seeing that it was Palestinian? Do you think it's reasonable to ask that question, like to look at what some of these people do and say, well, how is what you're doing consistent? Now, it could be you have a different pope, right? You could have a different Catholic Church, and there has been. I understand the abortion issue is very interesting in that vein as well, and I get it if you take a pro-life, as it's called, stance as you have, Jack. I totally understand that as consistent, but it's just many of the other decisions just don't seem to jibe with what is the current teaching.
In my humble opinion, you need to be pro-life, across the board, not just, with regard to fetuses. Of course, why it's difficult to judge is that when you get into a position like the Supreme Court, you're not supposed to be implementing Catholic teaching. You're supposed to be implementing the, American law. And if they see American law differently than I happen to, that doesn't necessarily reflect upon their Catholicism, but so it's I obviously there's got to be some mixture when it comes to Catholic teaching and politics. So, for example, if when it comes to abortion is obviously the clear one, but also when it comes to how we treat the poor, the disenfranchised, and so forth, that should have some input put on terms of what how we look at things politically, but I'm not sure exactly what impact that can have on a judge who's looking at American law and deciding what American law says. That's that's going to be different than Catholic teaching. So, I don't know. Do those guys look at American law and say this is what we think, or are they being disingenuous about that? Because people interpret the Constitution and statutes in different ways. I don't happen to usually agree with what they do, but that's my legal opinion, not necessarily my religious one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair to make that point. And certainly where the law is clear, for example, it would make sense that you would say, well, look, the law says this, I may feel differently. It may be a law, I personally very strongly disagree with. But if the law is the law of the land, then so be it. But a lot of times there's a lot of wiggle room, and we look at it and we disagree. So I think a good example of that is capital punishment. The Constitution says cruel and inhuman punishment is banned.
Right.
And then you get into, well, what is that? And the Catholic Church says, well, that includes capital punishment. So that's where I think if you're a devout Catholic and that informs your worldview, I'm just giving that as an example, or torture, that would seem to me where you would be almost remiss if you didn't invoke your morality, right? The morality that's been instilled in you to make it the law.
Yeah, well, there was I could definitely see that. Now, torture is obviously a clear one, but alas, it's been decided by the Supreme Court in the past that capital punishment is a constitutional remedy. I would like to see that changed. I'm not sure if I derived that from the cruel and unusual clause or if just from my Catholic faith. I'd certainly like to see an end of it. What would I do if I were a Supreme Court justice? I can't rightfully say. I mean, there's I don't, but I do believe that when you are in that position, your obligation is to follow the law that's there, and that's basically what you must do. And if you can't do it, then you owe it to the rest of society to resign your post, because that's the Supreme Court position. That's what it is to interpret the law and declare what the law is, in the words of Mary Mrs. Madison, and that's it. That's what that job consists of. Now, a legislator is, a member of Congress is something completely different. There, I think that there could be more overlap between what one's faith is and what the kind of legislation that one gets behind. So, for example, if I were a member of Congress, and there's no question but that I would do what I could to bring an end to capital punishment in the United States. And so but that's something I could do as a legislator. Not could I do that as a judge? It's a good question. How much is one's personal feelings supposed to impact how one decides what the law is?
So, I mean, very well taken points, Jack. I really want to think about that, because I think there is an argument, right, that capital punishment is not barred by the Constitution. It was the law of the land at the time when the Constitution was first written, and has been amended to include capital punishment. And the founders did not put in an amendment, or in the actual text itself, a banning of the practice. So I think you make a very good argument, even though I personally would vote if I was on the court. I would say, no, this is not acceptable. This is, under my reading of what is cruel and inhuman, that would count. But I get your point. Just to get right back to the new Pope, previously Father, I think it was Robert Francis Prevost. So he actually had the name Francis in he has it in his given name. Were you surprised that he didn't pick the name Francis too?
A little bit. When the white smoke went up, I told my wife, I said, I'll just bet you he picks the name Francis II. But he didn't. He picked Leo, and that's fine. I mean, I saw it. I guess I was surprised, but not too much.
I thought he would go with Francis II or Francis II, what have you, because Francis was a very influential pope. He is a very beloved pope in many ways. And I mean, I didn't know what his politics were, but it just seemed to make sense. We have seen in recent changes in the papacy that popes have adopted the name of the previous pope in several cases, including one, John Paul, who took the names of the two previous popes, and then obviously his successor took the name John Paul. So right. It is interesting. I wanted to just highlight this because it does seem as though Leo's priorities are similar to those of Francis. He, again, talking about peace, and this is released by Vatican News, so there's not really a media filter. He's talking to the media itself and saying, you guys have to do a better job promoting peace. I thought that was interesting because it's consistent with how Francis called Palestine every night. I didn't even know that. The New York Times didn't report that, as far as I can tell, until after Francis had died, which tells me that the media is not fostering peace whatsoever, not promoting the message from the Vatican that may be inconsistent with what the media owners and managers want.
Well, no, the media wants, I guess nowadays you call it clicks, but they want readership, and the readership, they imagine, and I don't know if they're right or not, but they get more readers by stirring things up, and that's not the same thing as promoting peace at all. So I've worried about that. I wonder if the media needs to be nonprofit. I mean, back in the day, you remember when we just had 3 networks. I think you're old enough to remember that, aren't you? And then they had and so you had Walter Cronkite, and that the idea was that they were kind of a loss leader for the network. They weren't supposed to make a profit. That was a way for the network actually had to spend money on that, and that was kind of a condition of them getting their license, their FCC license, and that worked out pretty well. But cable news came along, and that didn't have the same situation. There wasn't the same issue with regard to the air, taking up airwaves, and it became a profit making institution, and now that's what it is. So you got these so it becomes more or less showmanship now, and they got to get
I think we're all the losers. It's unfortunate because there's more media more news media outlets, but there's less news. Has the internet, like programs like this or others similar to it, and blogs like your own, are they filling? Do you believe can they fill the gap that we've lost? And what about newspapers?
Well, I'm a big fan of newspapers, but I think your show and my blog and similar things, these are, they're basically editorial. They're not a replacement for news. They're, the idea, in other words, I just put out my opinions, and, I imagine you do the same thing. And
well, we rely on traditional media for the information that underlines or underlies our opinions, I think.
well, sure. I mean, we try to be, I'm sure I know both of us try to be truthful in terms of what the underlying facts are, but there's but an opinion is one thing. What the underlying facts behind that opinion are something else. And we need to have more uh, news as far as the underlying facts goes. Now, when you mention the internet, now Associated Press, Reuters, I mean, I rely on those things. Uh, it's still there, but you actually have to actually go out and read it. You can't. You're not just sitting there watching. A bunch of people around a round table talking. Articulating their opinions about issues, and that's. I look at these things, and they're just uh, good point. The difference is, think about Meet the Press. What Meet the Press used to be. It used to be you'd have a politician or whatever, somebody there, some influencer. He'd be sitting in at a desk, and then there'd be 5 people, the host, and then four news people, and they would just ask questions, and that would be the whole show. And now you look at it, and every Sunday morning news show has a feature where the journalists just get in a circle and start talking about their views. Well, their views aren't really particularly important. They have a journalism degree. That's great, but they don't always have a good understanding of what they're talking about. You and I are both lawyers. We've seen it where the media gets it completely wrong with regard to what's going on legally.
And just to jump in real quick, when it comes to journalism degrees, now my son was covered Congress for a couple of years, and he had contempt for journalism, not the journalists with the degrees, but he contempt for the schools themselves. He felt that they didn't really teach you anything or anything that you wouldn't learn quicker and better by actually reporting.
Yeah, well, that's we professionalized a lot of things. I mean, there didn't used to be a specific educational path that one used to take with regard to journalism, but now there is, and that's they don't certify them, but that's become the path.
I think it's a problem actually, because in the 100 years ago, I believe, I'm going to say something I'm not certain it's correct, but I believe it is. I believe 100 years ago, most reporters did not have college degrees. They were more likely to have simply been apprentices, often in their teens, early teens at a newspaper. They showed a certain, go-getterness, whatever the word is, and facility with language. And so they became reporters, but they were more of the people, right? They didn't have a separate kind of background and upbringing than most readers of most news consumers.
Well, that's certainly one thing. The ethics of it has changed too. I mean, it's clear that a lot of these reporters come back with approach their issue with an agenda, and I think there you're talking about corporate media, and they're owned by whatever oligopoly they're owned by, and there's going to be an issue in terms of the management of the top brass. They want news to reflect a certain thing and not reflect other things, and that's become a problem. And we need journalism. We need news. And there was one, I can't remember the name of the guy, but he used to be the anchor on PBS. And I'm not sure one needs to go this far, but you recall that he said he never voted because he wanted to maintain complete objectivity with regard to political issues. Now, like I said, I don't think one needs to go that far, but that just goes to show you what was important to journalists back then.
I agree with that, Jack. I mean, I don't think you need to go that far, but I agree with you that it represents a very admirable desire to try to be as objective as you can be. I don't know whether you may or may not be referring to either McNeil or Lehrer from that McNeil Lehrer news hour. So,
yeah, Lehrer, I think.
A story about Jim Lehrer, real quick. I met Jim Lehrer. His daughter and I were actually at the same university, but I met him many years later at a high school event. My high school had him at the journalism offices down here in D.C. And I asked him the question, how, media is so, we have media for the wealthy and we have media for the upper middle class. He said reporters aspire to those offices and the people who own media are rich and powerful. Who's speaking for the homeless? Who's speaking for the poor? And he said he just said, it's a huge problem. You're right. He said that the media is very skewed and very biased because of the economics of the whole, the economics of the actual reporters themselves beyond the managers.
Yeah. No, that's the problem. So it'd be nice if we could get an objective media, but I think that in the current climate, I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, a lot of, first of all, it's just plain fluff, and second of all, they want to create drama. They want to create a situation where people are sitting on the edge of their seats, wondering what's going to happen in an election or what have you. It's interesting. You the way they cover elections and the way they cover politics is of specific note, and that is that you'll notice that they approach politics from the standpoint of a horse race. Who's doing a excuse me, who's doing who's ahead, and who's behind in the polls, and they kind of pick the candidates. They'll kind of tell people who the candidates are, and I remember this specifically in the Democratic primary when Bernie Sanders ran against Hillary Clinton. And, Hillary Clinton was just basically anointed by the media. And Bernie Sanders was just dismissed. They just came right out and, they just said, well, he's, not a significant player, but, obviously as he gained more and more votes, they had to, they had to recognize it. But they tried to rig the game too. They've got their favorites. And, I'll never forget again on that. This was on CNN, and it just seemed to me like they were just flat out rooting for Hillary Clinton when it came to the primary. They were just hoping that Hillary Clinton would pull ahead. This is in Michigan, my home state, and Bernie Sanders won that primary, and he was and they were just seemed like they were having a hard time accepting it, but maybe it's impossible to be completely objective at least for a human being, but gosh, you got to at least try.
I'm with you. You got to at least try. You got to try, Jack. Hey, let's get back to the Pope. I mean, we're kind of going off a little bit, which I love, and it's consistent with the discussion. But does it matter that Pope Leo is American, the first American from the United States?
Well, at first I was kind of concerned about that being the case. I didn't think it would be an American. I was kind of thinking maybe they might look for a pope in Africa where the church is mostly thriving. And I think they picked a good one who was an American. He spent a lot of time in Peru, of course, in his ministry. So I don't think he's tainted by the American perception as much as he might be if he spent his entire career here. Of course, an American cleric who spent his entire career in the United States probably doesn't have the background you would need to make that to be a good pope, because you're too isolated and insulated here in the United States from, even though we have a phenomenon when it comes to American poverty and slums and things of that nature. You're still far away from what's going on in the world. So, generally speaking, I would have thought that was a bad idea. But in the case of Pope Leo XIV, I don't think it's a bad idea. I think, and it actually, some people have been speculating that this might be specifically an attempt to tweak Donald Trump's nose. I don't know how true that is, but I think, given the situation in the United States, I think somebody who has a personal grasp, who actually voted in American elections, and given the impact that the United States can have around the world, it probably isn't a bad idea at all to have somebody who can communicate and register and grasp things on that level, because right now we're in a pretty dangerous spot. I mean, this president has threatened to annex Canada and Greenland, and he was going to annex the Panama Canal. Now, I don't know what he meant, whether he meant that to be, a diversion of some kind. I don't know, but the way he's handling the deportations, I mean, that's just a plain atrocity, like it was the last time. Only now it's worse.
Yeah. I just again jump in. I mean, this president now is, to my way of thinking, even worse than other ones we've had recently. Let me ask you about also about this pope, and maybe personal. You can sort of tell from this image, I guess, he has been reported to be mixed race, of Creole descent. And right. Does that matter? Does that signify any sea change in the church's race relations, or what matters or doesn't matter in society more broadly?
I think it's useful. For a long time, all the popes were Italian, right? Yeah. So, and so I don't think they really thought much about that. But now they started out with Pope John Paul II, and he was Polish. Then Benedict XVI, he was German. Then then Francis, and he was from Argentina. And now we have this. So he moved away from the Italian thing. Now, I think that's one thing I was thinking about. I've been thinking that we need popes from the third world. Let's put it that way. And given the time that he spent in Peru, and I guess I haven't thought in terms of his ethnic background, but given the time that he spent in the third world, I think that's critically important. You can't have, obviously, the one thing I would be concerned about with regard to an American pope, and I'm not concerned about this particular selection, but you don't want somebody getting in there who's an arm of the United States government. That's I think a lot of people would be concerned about that around the world. I mean, a lot of people think that want to think that we're just wildly popular worldwide, and I don't think that that's a realistic view. I mean, the United States has got a lot of clout militarily and so forth, and so we can get what we want that way. But it's not because we're persuasive or anything. we can't, for
Well,
example,
we're bullies. We're bullies, right? We're just bullies who push people around and tell them what they can and can't do,
right.
with varying degrees of success. But it's very, it's bad. It's not something that, it's a might makes right rather than justice is what's right. Jack Quirk with us, SocratesSpeaks.blogspot.com, and the Socrates Speaks part of that URL has no vowels. So that's how I was like, look, and I was like, can I say that? I wanted to make sure. So if you just want to,
I wanted to make it simple, but they wouldn't let me make it Socrates Speaks spelled out. So I decided, okay, I'll make it. I'll just use the consonants of Socrates Speaks. And
well, when you first started the blog, you even had trouble with it because I called you and I'm like, we were texting, how do I get to this? I can't find it. And, and we finally figured it out. So that was good. But it would be a real challenge for me, the way they pushed you to do that. I wanted to just discuss a little more what you were saying about choosing an African pope. My understanding is that the Catholic Church in Africa is a lot more conservative in a lot of ways, a lot more deferential to elites, especially very conservative on social doctrine. Does the fact that the cardinals chose a liberal to progressive pope suggest that the African movement to the right, if we can call it that, really hasn't permeated? It hasn't had an influence over the church more generally?
Well, the punchline to that is that actually Pope Leo XIV is considered a moderate in Catholic terms. He's, in terms of the United States, he may seem like a left-wing radical, but he's actually a moderate when you look at the Catholics. And I don't know whether Africa has conservative people or not in it. To be honest with you, I know Cardinal Sarah is pretty conservative, but that's only conservative in terms of liturgical issues. I don't think it necessarily follows that he's conservative in what things you would be concerned about in terms of political and stuff like that. A lot of times that gets confused. The doctrinal.
I think women priests, I'll tell you what I was thinking of, Jack. Very hard line on abortion, very hard line on women priests, opposed to any kind of expression of love, same-sex sexual love. That's where I think the African church, I'm not talking about South American, which I think there's real liberation theology there. Mm-hmm. But I'm just talking about what I understand, maybe incorrectly, about some of the African church.
First of all, when it comes to those issues, Pope Francis was hardline on abortion, women, priests, and everything else. I mean, any pope you're going to get is going to be quote unquote hard line on those issues because that's Catholic doctrine, and it's not the kind of thing that they can change. I mean, obviously, there's going to be a difference in terms of how we respond to it. For example, homosexuality. I mean, just because you have a moral belief about it one way or the other doesn't mean that you should take gay people and throw them in jail or persecute them in any way. And that's another issue. And I think Pope Francis summed it up completely. He said homosexuality, by which he meant it's not a state of being, but homosexual sex, he said, is a sin. It's not a crime. And that's the difference. Just because you think something is a sin doesn't mean you think it's a crime. So it's not. So it's interpreting what Catholic clerics say with regard to those kinds of issues, has to be understood in light of the fact that they're spiritual teachers, not legislators or anything like that. They're saying what the Catholic faith is, and that's what the Catholic faith is. The doesn't mean that you go around, you know, taking homosexuals and burning them at the stake or anything like that. That's not what it is. Unfortunately, I've noticed there's a lot of folks that have a hard time making that distinction, and I'm not exactly sure why that is. I suppose because politics is where, if they're not Catholic or belonging, they're strong adherents to a religion, that's the area that touches them the most. And so when they hear what Catholic teaching is on this or that, they think in terms of, oh, okay, so if you get your way, you're going to impose this on the rest of us, and that's not true at all. Also, the media plays a role with regard to how popes, at least, are perceived. Benedict XVI was considered to be a conservative, but Benedict XVI was not a conservative in anything that's in the area of Catholic social teaching. He was a conservative when it came to liturgy. Okay, like in other
So
words,
that would mean more Latin, less of the language of the country that the church is in the services.
It could be, but not necessarily. Let's say being more tolerant of that, and there's a lot of people that like that. There's a lot of people that like to go to the Latin Mass, and I have to say, I'll be honest with you. I think that if you've ever gone to a high Mass with Gregorian chant and everything else, that's really an incredible experience. So I can say that I'm sympathetic to that point of view. Although you can, I don't see why you can't do it in English, but or the language
or Spanish, right? I mean, if you're in Spain, they're going to be in Spanish, whatever language.
That's what I meant to say. Yeah.
So let me just move on a little bit, because I did want to get into Socrates Speaks, and you touched on this in your blog. This is from a column that I actually commented on, but this is not the one I want to talk about in this moment, Jack. I remember many years ago when I was doing radio in Monterey, I did several shows with a Catholic lay writer named Deal Hudson, and I was amazed at the number of calls I got from either lapsed Catholics or angry Catholics. They were angry at the church. They felt the church had let them down in various ways, but in the most frequent way that was cited was the sex scandals, because this was coming out quite a number of the scandals where priests had molested adolescents, usually adolescent boys, not only, but usually they were adolescent boys. And not only that priests had molested, but there was a cover-up from higher ups, from bishops, from cardinals.
Right.
In your opinion, and I know there's been some questioning about both Francis and Leo, whether they did enough. In your opinion, has the church, in your opinion, satisfactorily responded to this and taken the steps necessary to protect youngsters?
Well, I was a catechist right after that. And first of all, I put me in the side of those who were furious about it, because I was certainly angry myself. But when I was a catechist, they put me through training and everything else, right? And I was teaching high school kids. And then the guy who was in charge of the whole program, he ended up having a tryst with one of the students. And we went through all kinds of training, and don't do this, don't do that. I mean, it's kind of it seems like it's kind of obvious that you don't try to have sex with the people who are relying on you to give them religious doctrine. I mean, that just seems to be
and our children to boot, are legally children.
That's just, but even if they're not children.
No, I agree. Of course. it's wrong no matter what, but it's,
Yeah,
I think Moses are more offended significantly when it's a child. Or, there was a scandal here in DC where a rabbi was spying on women in their ritual bath. There's this ritual bath, you clean yourself before the Shabbat. And this rabbi was spying on the women and some girls as well. So it was horrible. I mean, that was totally non-consensual. So I think that's where people might look at a situation where you have a priest or a minister who's having sex with another adult. Well, it's not right. You shouldn't do that, but it's still not of the same quality, right? It's qualitatively different.
It's not a crime. It's not a civil type of crime, obviously, but that when you do it that way. But no, I think there's I think we could go further. I'm not. I don't think you can completely prevent child sexual abuse in the sense that I mean, it happens in public school too. I mean, it's not like the church is the only place where it happens, but you should obviously try to minimize it. And the first thing, as far as preventing it coming in, I think the church has done enough. Because we all get the training, right? We get fingerprinted and stuff like that when I became a catechist. So, but obviously, fingerprinting only tells you whether somebody, if he's committed a crime, maybe just hasn't been caught, right? But what to do on the other end when these people are caught, I think we still need some work to do. And I think that there's been some, there's been some bureaucratic inertia with regard to that. Like, for example, the current Pope had an issue where he referred some guy to the Vatican court that handles such things, and they just seem to have dropped it. And you got to snap to with regard to this. They've got to actually, first of all, it's got to be a one strike and you're out kind of thing, right?
Here, Jack weighs in on whether clerics guilty of molestation should be defrocked.
Yeah, well, defrocked is one thing. The problem with defrocking somebody is that then the church loses control over the guy, okay? So, like that cardinal, is it McCarrick? It turns out he'd been engaging in some misdeeds, and he was stripped of being a cardinal, but he wasn't removed from the clerical state. He was just basically sentenced to sit in a monastery, right? That was, and of course, you can at that point you can still order him to cooperate with law enforcement and so forth. I thought that in that particular issue, and I touched on this I think in the last blog post, there's a law was passed in the state of Washington where they're trying to get priests to divulge sexual abuse that was confessed to them in confession. Now, obviously, that's never going to happen, but no priest is ever going to do that. You can put them in front of a firing squad if you want. They're not going to do it. But what you could do, what the church could do, I think, is establish a rule in canon law where if somebody comes in and confesses something like that, particularly a cleric, or maybe other serious crimes as well. I mean, there's no law there's no canon law that requires that absolution be given in confession. And so if somebody comes and confesses something, I think that I don't see anything wrong with making the requirement that before the person who makes the confession gets absolution, that he turn himself into the authorities.
Next, I asked Jack to discuss his blog, Socrates speaks.blogspot.com.
Well, the idea is to take political and social issues and play them out with in a Socratic dialogue. You know, excuse me. I've been told that my writing can sometimes get a little dense, and so I've decided perhaps the best way to get a point across is, well, the same way Plato did it. put it in the dialogue, and so I'm going to try that. Let's see how it works. Some people
I think you're a really good writer, Jack. By the way, for those listening now, I know I was muted for a moment. Jack could hear me, but others may not. I will upload a video with the correct volume, the correct audio. So I apologize for that mistake there. Jack, I think you're a really good writer. I've read professional, in quotes, writers. As lawyers, we had to write a lot. I don't practice anymore either. So you do develop, I hope I did a certain facility with language and with writing and persuasiveness. But I read novelists, authors, and I'm like, this is crap. I'm not impressed at all. So, that's, what you wrote in Socrates Speaks grabs me. So I would say you are a good writer. I don't feel like it's too dense, although I have read some of your work. I don't think Socrates Speaks meets the dense stuff, the dense criticism, but maybe some of the others do. That said, what I understand it is you have your alter ego, is it? Or someone you've created walking with Socrates who plays your alter ego? Is it really, are you really Socrates then?
Well, I like it. I've actually been writing Socratic dialogues for myself for a while, and I always try to make myself Socrates' foil. It's a sort of I think I derived that from. Do you remember the Carlos Castaneda books?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Castaneda books, Don Juan, a Yaqui Way of Knowledge. You remember that? No, I guess not. Guess you have to be a certain age, I guess. Well, anyway, the idea was there was an anthropology student, and he went down to Arizona to talk to this Yaqui Indian about medicinal plants that were used in that culture, and he ends up being a sorcerer's apprentice, and it's just and the way he writes is that the Yaqui sorcerer, who he calls Don Juan, is obviously the wise one, and he's the one that keeps screwing up and things like that. So I kind of like that format of making yourself the foil. Obviously, I don't believe the things that when I called the character that's, would you say, my alter ego, I call him Jacob, and I don't believe a lot of the things that Jacob says. But I'm trying to set it up, and I actually try and glean from what I see or hear other people talking about, and I put that in Jacob's mouth, and then Socrates asks questions about it, which refutes it, and, shows the illogicalness of the position that I've taken, or that Jacob has taken. But in the last one, I actually used the first name of the legislator that proposed what that legislation in Washington State. I call it priest in custody, and showed her how, basically, I didn't completely make up her opinion out of whole cloth. I mean, obviously, there was the legislation that she forwarded, but also there was an article in that she posted on her website that showed what she was thinking, and almost comically that she considered it to be a separation of church and state. But I wanted to I used her as the foil, and the alter ego Jacob, to sort of sitting there and watching the whole thing. But so I'm not always going to do that same not only going to use Jacob as the foil, but the idea is to have some kind of foil, somebody taking a position that at least I believe is easily refuted by reason and logic. So
Jack goes on to discuss the importance of publicly financed elections.
I would say the only legitimate financing of a campaign, whether it's a direct or an indirect donation, it comes from public funds. I don't see any other way of doing it. You just can't have private money and elections for public office.
All right, Jack, and now the more, I think, challenging question, and the one that I'm really fascinated by, how do we create a society where, as we both agree, everyone should have enough and no one has too much, but we still incentivize people to produce, to innovate, to market?
Well, I think that there's this would be a whole nother show, but I think there's three things. First of all, we're never going to get anywhere until we have strict public financing of campaigns. That's one thing, because without it, we don't have a democracy. Second of all, I think we're going to need a heavy progressive income tax. Maybe go back to the way it was in the 60s or the 70s, well, actually the 50s was well, in the 70s as well. Actually, in the 1950s, the top tax bracket was 91%. And then in the 60s, there was a tax break, and the top tax rate was 70%. Then Reagan came along, and that was the end of that. And now we have explosive deficits. The government can't do anything. Yeah, I mean, think of what we were able to have back in the days, in Eisenhower's days. We had we had the public highways and went to the moon and everything else. I mean, now we have a completely feckless government that can't do much of anything. They're always short of money and so forth, and that's because of the tax system. And
I would argue, Jack, that it's not even a coincidence that the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the environmental movement all came about at a time when we had very, very high top marginal tax rates. The middle class felt secure enough that it could actually consider other people, rather than just, I need enough to live myself. All right, I feel secure. I have a pension. I have a job. My wife can stay home with the kids. They can get an education at Cal or whatever for a couple $100 a semester. Mm-hmm. It isn't right what those people down in Birmingham are doing to those black people. That's just not right. We shouldn't be at war with Vietnam. We need to, I care about the environment, since I'm going to probably live a decent life. I want to be able to go to a nice, clean public park. I think they all go together.
I think you're right. I think that's an excellent point. Because now the middle class doesn't feel that secure. They're just they're living hand to mouth, and they're wondering, they want to just keep their jobs and not lose their source of livelihood. And so it's become and I think that's, I don't know, I haven't read the Powell memo in a while, but that might actually be a deliberate outcome. And so, yeah, no, it's pretty sad what's going on. And the whole thing started, and I can't claim that I understood that that's what Reagan was going to do when he first came along. But now it's pretty obvious what the intention was as far as that goes. So, that's and so now we're in a serious spot, and now we're in a situation where people are struggling, and someone like Trump comes along and promises them that he's going to bring the United States to some kind of golden age, and people glom onto it because they're desperate, and that's how that this is how dictatorships form, right?
You know what, Jack? You sound like me. I'm like, uh-oh, maybe I better need to change my views a little bit because I'm sort of hearing you parrot myself back, or I'm parroting you or something. But no, no, it's always, it's sad, but I guess there's a certain satisfaction when you talk to people you agree with who see things the same way.
Well, I think there's a lot of people that see this. The problem is that you and I don't have any power. Me especially. I mean, I'm pretty middle class. What can I do? It's I suppose I can go join a protest. I can write a blog. Hopefully,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, finish.
yeah, no, hopefully, somebody with some influence will catch on. But alas, we have a media that's captivated by corporate capitalism, and it's pretty hard for the internet was supposed to be a way that people can communicate with each other, but they found a way to make it a source of propaganda, so that people, sometimes people say things like on Facebook that are so out of left field. I mean, I have to wonder where, I sometimes have to ask them, did you make that up yourself, or where did you get that from?
I hear you, man. And like, what's the right reaction? Do you just ignore this? Do you bring it out? Do you point out the logical fallacies in it? I mean, there's a million different ways, and probably they're all wrong, because who knows when something, what is it? A lie makes its way halfway around the world before the truth puts on its pants. It's hard to know. Before we let you go, I usually ask my guests, Jack, to give their final thoughts on whatever they want to discuss. I'm going to change that a little bit. I am going to include that in my final question, but my final question, beyond anything else you want to add, is the question we open with, which we never fully address. Will Leo be a positive change agent? And what might that look like if he is?
I think he's going to be a continuation of what Francis already started. And he's not a clone of Pope Francis, but based on on what he said before, I think let's think about it in terms of in terms of the United States situation, and I think he's going to have some impact on Trumpism in the United States. I mean, he's going to be vilified by the Trumpists, but including the Trumpists that are in the Catholic Church, but he's going to. I think he's going to give some strength to the people that are, at least the Catholics, that are opposed to what they see what's going on. I mean, it's nice if you, from the standpoint of being a Catholic, it's nice if you can point to the Pope and say, "Hey, the Pope agrees with what I'm saying," and so I think there'll be some impact there. I don't think he's going to be popular with the American right wing. I mean, the same thing as Pope Francis. And you got that. So you had some people on the right wing, and they were trying to make it look. They're trying to say Pope Francis is a heretic and this and that and the other thing. And some were saying he's not even validly the Pope, and you're going to see that. I mean, it's going to be the same thing that you always see with regard to that. I mean, even Benedict XVI and John Paul II got that, but we're just going to have to soldier on. Those of us who are sincere about wanting to follow Catholic teaching, at least are going to have a pope that has a sense of humanity about him when it comes to refugees and things of that nature, and a sense of humanity.
Let me just interrupt you there, because I think that has great value. I'm glad you said that, because I think that people around the world who are oppressed or who are just poor, I think there is psychic value in knowing that somebody who has this level of stature cares about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's exactly the kind of pope we need in this what some people call late stage capitalism. I don't know what it is in that regard, but I'll just say corporate oligopolic capitalism. They, there's no, you got to have some voice in your say. I guess I don't need to say any more than you did. It's obvious we need a pope that speaks for that class of society and around the world, not just in the United States, but around the world. And especially, we haven't mentioned climate change. He's obviously an advocate to do something about climate change, and that's becoming a more and more serious problem as time goes on. People are, pretty soon. I mean, if you think about the people in Oceania and the islands there, they're starting to lose they're starting to lose the ground under their feet. And there's
heck in Miami, people are losing their homes.
Yeah,
because of flooding and the like.
Yeah. So I mean, it's it's going to cause mass migrations and things like that. I mean, it's hard to say how bad it's going to get, but worst case scenario is that a large part of the earth becomes uninhabitable. I mean, that's just nuts. To create a situation like that for profit is, I don't know. I think that's just insanity. How do you tell yourself that's a good thing to do? I guess you just deny that it's real. Somehow CO2 isn't really a greenhouse gas. Geology 101 was disinformation.
You're asking a lot of questions, and I've thought about them, and I don't have the answers either, Jack. I wish I had some of them, but it's great chatting with you. I'm glad we got to catch up. Good seeing you virtually here. Don't forget SocratesSpeaks.blogspot.com. No vowels in Socrates Speaks. And I'll be back tomorrow. It's an Arlen Tuesday. Jack, last time, man. Thanks so much.
Hey, no problem. I enjoyed it.
All right. And I will return tomorrow, Arlen Tuesday, and Andy Ellis Wednesday. So some great guests this week following up on today's great guest.